Well, greetings to everybody. I've got a very interesting guest today for you, Robin Tilbrook, who's wears many a hat and is very informed on lots of things which are going on at the moment and have been going on for some time. He is representative of the English Democrats, the Workers of England Union, a very good union indeed, and various other things that he does, all extremely informed. And he can put you a little bit right on stuff, and me right on where we may be looking in what's coming down the road on various matters. So what I'm going to do is hand it over to him and let him talk about what he wants to talk about. And I think you'll find it jolly interesting. I know I'm not quite looking forward to this interview. So, Robin, dear boy, take it away if you will.
Well, thank you, Godfrey, for that introduction. I certainly hope to live up to it. As you'll rightly say, I'm the chairman and leader of the English Democrats, which is really the principal campaigning English nationalist party. We thought it was pretty strange that the Scots had got their nationalist party, the Welsh had got their nationalist party, the Irish had got their nationalist party, but the oldest of all the nations had not got its own party, and instead the British establishment, particularly at the time led by Gordon Brown and co, were trying to break us up into regions, which is still ongoing as a project. We do think we're needed in terms of fighting for England's future. You also introduced me as the chairman of the Workers of England Union. We think that's a very important union because actually it is the only one that's really willing to stand up for people whose opinions are not leftist. And in fact, we had a fairly extreme example of this during the lockdown and COVID and so on. At the time when the masks were suddenly mandated, having previously been told, including by Matt Hancock, that they were useless at preventing infection or even preventing spreading it. Then suddenly the state decided that they were actually useful, admittedly for psychological nudge purposes, rather than really anything to do with the disease. One of our members who'd got recently joined member, she'd got asthma, and she was told that she had to wear a mask, even though there wasn't any really any particularly good reason for her to do so in her type of work. But because she got asthma, she basically couldn't wear the mask for medical reasons. So she approached her then union, which was Unison, and asked them to help. And she'd been a member of Unison for about 15 years. She'd never asked them to do anything before at all. She'd just given them her money. So this first time that she asked them to do something, they said they wouldn't do anything because it was against Labour Party policy, which personally I think is a disgrace and shows just how unprofessional the Labour sporting trade unions are, that they don't regard their duty as being to represent their members, but instead to represent Labour policy. The interesting thing is, of course, it wasn't really Labour policy. It was simply the leadership's policy. You wouldn't have found wearing masks as being part of the Labour's manifesto. It wasn't there. So, I mean, we do need a union that is prepared to stick up for its members and is prepared to do so even when the member is expressing opinions which the left and the equality and diversity social justice warriors don't like. It's needed. The Workers' of England Union is that union.
Well, yeah, listening, I've been involved in this as well, a little bit on my side of the fence, as it were. So the link will be there. If you look below, you'll find the link to this excellent union. And I do recommend anybody who's a member of one of the legacy trade unions switches, because it's a well-known fact they're not interested in you. If you're an ordinary member, it's a political institution, legacy trade unions, who are beholden, of course, to the Labour Party. And they no longer represent workers, and they haven't done for decades now. I think everybody will agree. They're on monster salaries, and it's the TUC Congress. It's it's in the pub, and it's back scratching, and it's the whole thing. We've gone right back to the beer and sandwiches at number 10. So they're not in your interests. Do look at this union. I've already looked at it, and I recommend it to you for what that is worth. Do look it up, and Robin's quite right in what he says.
Thank you, Godfrey. Actually, I think it's probably no longer beer and sandwiches. It's probably lemonade and tofu or something like
that. Oh, God help us all. Yeah. So now, one of the things that crops up as bloggers, as I suppose I must be called, I have always given my opinions in a fairly forthright way, and it seems now, as we've seen with Alison Pearson and various others, that you can get a knock on the door from a policeman who is usually rather bovine, who doesn't really know what he's doing, but he's told to come and knock on your door. I have suffered this last year. The chap came round, and somebody in Scotland had objected to something I'd tweeted. I'm going back 2 years now. I think it was two years, and I put a flea in the guy's ear. I said on there, either arrest me or bugger off. And I get the impression, and you know much more about this than I do, but I welcome your observations on this. It seems if you are white, working class, you are a fair target. If you are slightly better heeled and better informed, they can't intimidate you. But I'd like to, or they certainly don't intimidate me. If they come round, I can draw another flea in their bloody ear. So tell me a little bit about what you could do. Where would I go to if I wanted? I used to have a very good solicitor, and he's retired now. He was an advocating solicitor, one of those sort of chaps who's not a barrister, but he can do what barristers do. And he was bloody good. And he wrote the occasional letter to people on my behalf, absolutely blowing them out of the water with his from the legal perspective. So let's say I get a knock on the door. Any of my followers, who are also bloggers, many of them, knock on the door. I've said a Hurty word, and I'm getting the Alison Pearson treatment. What's my first thing? What do I do? What's my first thing?
Well, one of the things that happened in the reaction to the Southport murders was that quite a lot of people expressed outrage on social media. Very understandable that they did so. One or two of them said things that proved not to be true. Although I do think it's interesting that what turns out to be the case is that it's probably more of a cover-up by Starmer and co. Than was certainly admitted at the time. So I think we're going to find that becomes ever more of a scandal. But the point is, what a lot of them did was that they were people who had never been in trouble with the police before. And they did the worst possible thing, which is basically to assume that the police are friendly and sensible and applying common sense. Whereas, in fact, they are really only there to try and get a conviction if they possibly can. We used to talk about the police standing up for law and order, whereas nowadays they talk about law enforcement. And what that means is that they're actually trying to get a conviction, and the only purpose of talking to you is to get you to say something that will get you convicted. So quite a lot of these people talk to the police without getting their solicitors present. If they'd got a solicitor present, they would have been advised not to say anything, and at that point, it would have been difficult for the police to convict. In fact, we saw an example, really, partly of two-tier policing, but also partly of what the sense of what I've just said, because there was a whole load of Muslim youths who went round the Jewish parts of North London, shouting out that they were going to rape Jewish women and various other things of the sort, in the fallout from the attack on the Israelis in Israel by Hamas. They didn't speak to the police. They didn't give a statement. They have not been cooperative with the police. And the result is that the police, even though there's video evidence of them doing it, the police have dropped the prosecution and they're not going to be prosecuted. Now, you might say that's because they're Muslim and they're part of, they've got special protection. And of course, we know that that is the way that the system is now operating. But it is also not cooperating. And not pleading guilty when you actually get before the court. You know, this is part of the reason why a lot of these people wound up being swiftly arrested, shoved in front of a court, and then sentenced to long terms of imprisonment. They assumed that they were going to be treated with common sense, but of course that is not the way the system tends to operate these days.
I was watching. So I'm sure you probably check in occasionally with him, the black belt barrister, and his view, and I think he's doing very good work actually. I think on his website and blog site and stuff like that, he's doing good work because most ordinary folk don't have immediate access to chaps like you. I mean, I have loads of mates at the rugby club or loads of mates at the boozer, who are lawyers. And would always, be on hand, and you could phone them immediately. But they've all retired now, and I'm in a situation personally where I don't have a lawyer mate other than you, Robin. I don't have any lawyer mates, so I thought you'd probably say that. So the answer then is basically no comment is the best way of remaining silent, which you're entitled to do.
Yes.
Is the best way, and leave them punching air, because the more you speak, the more you're likely to entangle yourself. On the occasion that I had this fellow, I had a policeman come round the back door at my house because I had said something which some anonymous person in Scotland had taken exception to, and basically told him to just bugger off. I wasn't interested, or come back and arrest me, or do something. But he wasn't going to get me to come in to he wanted a tape recorded interview with me at the police station. I said, yeah. Absolutely not. Go away. And I had a good lawyer in those days, and he put a written flea in the guy's ear, and that's the last I ever heard to it. But of course, your ordinary working class white guy doesn't have any form of access. And so I gather that was the court solicitor was saying, well, the best thing you can do is plead guilty, mate, and you get a slap wrist and you can walk away. And of course they fell for it, and they've got custodial sentences, which these days I think you'll agree, Robin, getting a custodial sentence these days is almost bloody impossible unless you're saying hurty words on Twitter. I mean, we've seen the other chap at Manchester, broke a policewoman's nose. No charges. It's on camera. Well, I mean, what do you have to do to get a custodial sentence if it's not hurty words? The whole thing's absolutely ridiculous. So
but
let's take it from there. Take it from there. What do I do?
It is worth bearing in mind that what you read, if you look with sort of lawyer's eye at it, the reports are generally that these people have pleaded guilty to some really quite serious offence. And that's partly because they've spoken to the police, so the police have got the evidence to convict them. They've then been prosecuted with the most serious offences which could possibly be put forward, and they've pleaded guilty to those. Where somebody's pleaded guilty to making statements on social media that are intended to incite racial hatred, which is what some of them have pleaded guilty to, then they probably are going to get a custodial sentence. Because you've got to bear in mind that Keir Starmer has a finger in this, because when he was the director of public prosecutions, he was involved, obviously, with the Justice Council, which does actually set the tariffs for these things, and he made it so that the sentencing for hurty words was dramatically increased, and we're now at a point where the system would be judges would be expected to give more serious sentences to hurty words than they will give to people who actually assaulted somebody. And in fact, another example really was that young man who had thrown a basket that somebody had set on fire against the door of one of the illegal immigrant hotels near Southport, and he got 10 years for that. Nobody was hurt. I mean, you could argue that some people might have been frightened by it. I wouldn't query him getting some sort of custodial, but normally I suspect it would have been a suspended sentence rather than an immediate custodial sentence where you actually went to prison. But he got 10 years immediate custodial. Well, that is actually more than the courts have been handing out to the Pakistani Muslim child rape gang people, where they've been convicted of raping underage girls. I mean, I've been involved in a case where the girl got 2 convictions against one of her perpetrators for rape when she was 14. And he got 9 years for that. And that, by the way, wasn't a sentence where he'd pleaded guilty. He pleaded not guilty. He fought the case. She was made to be cross-examined. And so that's comparing 9 years for 2 child rapes where you pleaded not guilty, as against 10 years for something that doesn't actually hurt anybody at all, but might be frightening. And that person had pleaded guilty, so he's supposed to get a discount for pleading guilty. So you can imagine that, in effect, it's probably 12 years or 13 years if he'd fought it.
Tell us all about sentencing policy, because I don't think most people fully understand sentencing policy, and they will have seen, as I have, the judge, in his lovely scarlet robes and all the rest of it, harangue somebody for this very, very serious incident, and I look at the guy and I think, no, it isn't. You're saying this is very, very serious, and this is, absolutely this, and he's droning on about it. And I think to myself, what is it that's motivating you to drone on about that when it's clearly what you're saying is absurd? Is this, as I suspect, the politicization of the judiciary in some form? He was obviously out of his tree on this. So what he would have actually said to your child rapist or a murderer or somebody killed somebody through manslaughter, one wonders what the rant would have been to somebody who'd really done something serious and not posted something on the website. Where are these characters, Robin, coming from? I've been seeing, in my view, a slippery slope for some time with political appointees, started under Blair, of course, as everything did. These characters they shouldn't be on the bench, and one wonders how they got on the bench. Tell us all about that. A lot of people want to know this.
Yes, and Godfrey, that's a very important point, because the system has been politicized generally. I mean, it's the appointment system is a system where you can't be appointed to many positions unless you satisfy the criteria that you've got a lifetime's commitment to equality and diversity. So basically all the judiciary now are people who've gone through this process with the Judicial Appointments Commission, which was set up by Blair and co, to make sure that the appointment of any sort of judge, including magistrates, that they are people who are social justice warriors. So you are dealing, if you've got a case that's in any way sort of political, then you are dealing with somebody who is going to be against you if you're not yourself a social justice warrior, or one of the protected groups. It's also worth thinking what lifetime's commitment to equality and diversity might actually mean. So for people like you or I, what it would certainly mean is that we were activists. And you see that with Lady Hale, Brenda Hale, who became the president of the Supreme Court, which is another Blair creation, of course. She basically she wouldn't have been appointed under the old system because she wasn't thought of as being a top flight lawyer. She was a competent lawyer. I mean, I'm not saying she's incompetent, but her principal character that got her appointed and kept getting her promoted until she became, in effect, most senior judge, was that she was a very active campaigning feminist, and I think also a member of the Labour Party, certainly a Labour supporter. That got her appointed to the High Court bench, and that got her promoted repeatedly. So that's one pathway. And then the other pathway, which I think is worth thinking about, is obviously having a protected characteristic. And I can't really do better than quote Joshua Rosenberg, who's the Telegraph's and BBC's sort of lead commentator on legal matters, and he was saying that equality and diversity was making, this is a few years ago, he was saying equality and diversity was making real progress in the appointment system within the judiciary, and the proof of that, he said, was that out of the last 6 Masters of the Rolls, which is one of the most important judges, out of the last 6 Masters of the Rolls, 5 had been Jewish and 1 was gay.
Where do we come like grasshoppering about, as I said I would, Robin, forgive me for it, but I'm just thinking of people that are watching this, will be watching this in a day or two, and they'll be probably like me shouting at the screen, why don't you ask him this? Why don't you ask him that? So one thing would be is, I've read the European Court of Human Rights Act, the appropriate bits, and I'm not a lemon, I'm reasonably intelligent sort of dude, but that's as far as it goes, not much further. It seems to me that when you read it, there is total protection in that for you to express a view, and freely and fairly, as long as you're not inciting violence, etc. But you can express a view, and there is a caveat. There's a get-out clause with it. Basically, it says you're entitled to say exactly what you like when you like under the European Court of Human Rights, unless, of course, you don't agree with your government. So your government saying, yeah, well, we're not doing that. So, but I know that it should be, and I've been speaking against it because I think we should have laws of our own and not the ECHR. But leaving that aside, when I look at it, I think that would seem to me to be my first offence, because they would then have to prove that the caveat that they have there holds water. They would have to the prosecution would have to prove that under these circumstances didn't count. I would imagine as a non-lawyer, that would be quite difficult.
Yes. So, I mean, we are back to at least partly the point that you and I were making earlier about people pleading guilty. If you pleaded guilty, you can't argue any of this.
Right.
But if you were pleading not guilty and fighting the case, there are 2 different sort of points that arise. One is that if you're being prosecuted under some sort of law or other, the European Court of Human Rights isn't quite so helpful, because there was actually a case where somebody had put up in his windows something against Islam. I forget exactly what it was, but basically get Islam out of the country, something like that. And he was then prosecuted, I think, by Boris Johnson's mayoralty of London, and he then tried to argue that he shouldn't have been prosecuted and shouldn't have been convicted, and that the European Court of Human Rights should intervene. But there is a provision that you're not allowed to say something that's sort of you're not allowed to use the European Convention to undermine the European Convention or the rights that are there for others. And so he failed in that. But that isn't the end of the story, because there's also the provision that, and that only applies to criminal matters, that rule. So in a civil matter, generally speaking, you do have the right to freedom of speech. So one of the things that's become more and more common, which we've been dealing with the Workers of England Union, is employers trying to interfere with employees' freedom of speech. So somebody's posted up something on the internet which the employer disagrees with, politically, and the employer is quite often, particularly some sort of state employer, is quite often then trying to discipline the employee. Well, the lead case on that is in Redfern, which actually the guy was a BNP activist. He'd stood for the BNP in Derby City Council elections, I think, and at the time he was the BNP were a party that didn't allow anybody other than whites to join. And therefore, although it's a British National Party, he was really a white race nationalist, and he failed in bringing his claim for unfair dismissal against the bus company that he'd worked for. The bus company claimed that somebody might hurt themselves whilst protesting against them, I think, but it was a ludicrous and horrific example of just how bad some of these human rights laws can be. But he then kept on appealing, and he went to the European Court of Human Rights, and he won there. And the European Court of Human Rights basically upheld his right to be a member of a white race nationalist party, and that should have meant, and that the UK law protected him from being sacked for that. That is the basis on which we've now got a provision in the Equality Act where you're not allowed to be discriminated against on the grounds of what's called system of philosophical belief. But the system of philosophical belief includes political opinions. And so we do have, there is a protection there, and we have actually been fighting various cases about that, one of which I think is of interest, where we've got the tribunals to rule on a number of occasions that somebody who is an English nationalist is that is a protected characteristic, being an English nationalist, and if you're sacked for being an English nationalist, you can sue the employer for doing so. At the moment, there is a restriction on that if you go so far as to say something that the judges who are appointed through the system I was saying earlier think is unacceptable, that you might be told that your expression of opinion was too extreme and therefore you won't be protected. But we're going to be taking that to the European Court of Human Rights, and I'm pretty confident that when we get there, we'll get another ruling similar to Redfern, saying
that's actually quite encouraging, Robin, because so it's not a no-hoper then to go there. I always thought that they were political appointees over there, and they all piss in each other's pockets.
They are political appointees, but but they're more openly political appointees. I mean, one of the bad things about our system is it pretends to be neutral. It pretends to be appointing people on merit, whereas they're not appointed on merit. And the fact that they're political appointees and have political opinions that are being sifted to make sure that they're the correct political opinions, according to the establishment, is kept secret. If you were to contrast that with the American system, where federal judges can be nominated by the president, but they then have to go through an open process of vetting by the Senate.
And I've watched some of those. I've watched quite a lot of those actually on TV. On the not on TV, but on my sort of machine here, my iPad, and some of the Republicans are fairly merciless, aren't they, when they get hold of a no hope Democrat lunatic wannabe judge?
The Republicans can be, but even more unscrupulous and merciless, I think, are the Democrats. If you remember when Trump was trying to appoint somebody who was basically an ordinary conservative judge who had been a judge in the tier below the Supreme Court. He was actually a sincere and married father and husband and practicing Catholic. So consequently, the left went absolutely bananas, and we got some woman appear out of nowhere claiming that 40 years before he had sexually assaulted her, and that she had all sorts of problems ever since. Although it was interesting to see that she was a lecturer at a lefty Californian college.
Yeah, no surprise there. Tell me about your experience of juries these days. I'm completely and totally out of touch on this kind of thing. Talk to me about juries. I mean, I like the old system where you had to be 21 years old and a householder. That meant, for me, 12 good men and true, judgment by my peers, because that is my peer group. And so I'm not quite sure where we are with all this kind of thing now. But my gut feeling, you tell me if I'm wrong, that a lot of these people have been convicted recently because they stupidly pleaded guilty because they were being pressured. Had they shut up, said nothing, and gone in front of a jury, that they would probably not have been convicted.
I agree. So I think that's probably what would have happened. The jury system is certainly better than critics would have you believe. It does inject a degree of common sense into what's going on in the law, and after all, juries, just because the law says that somebody what they've done might be guilty, the jury doesn't have to convict them.
Exactly, and I don't think a lot of people understand that.
Juries do refuse to convict where they don't think it's just for the person to be convicted. And that's within their rights, and has been since the Bill of Rights, 1689. I do think the modern jury is quite. It depends where you wind up being tried. I was acting in the case of a UKIP activist some years ago now, and he was being prosecuted in Essex, and the prosecution suddenly announced that they didn't really like the idea of prosecuting him in Essex because more than half of people of Essex had voted leave, and therefore they thought they wouldn't, as they claimed, get a fair trial because Essex people would be very sympathetic to this UKIP activist. And I think the Essex people would have been very sympathetic, and he would have been acquitted. So what the prosecution then did was they got it shifted to Southwark, and of course the juries in Southwark are mostly black and ethnic minority, or far left, or LGBTQ plus, and you could see that when you actually got into the courtroom in Southwark. That's precisely what we had. We had some quite clearly far left characters, one or two who looked very likely to be LGBTQ plus, and then probably half the jury were black and minority ethnic. I think one of the threads between all of those in Southwark was there probably wasn't a single one of the jury who had voted leave. And when the prosecution case had finished and the defence case had finished, the judge gave a summing up, which was basically that it was pretty clear that he hadn't passed the threshold of being convicted and he ought to be acquitted. And the prosecution actually said to our barrister that he thought that our guy was going to be acquitted, but sure enough, he was convicted. And that was down to the politics of the jury.
But that's not, that is not trial by your peers. Can you not? I mean, surely that's so outrageously wrong. Trial by your peers is from householders, good men and true, from your own county, one would imagine.
Mm.
So how did they get away with that? How do you get away with that?
I do agree. And we did advise an appeal, but he'd had enough at that point, and he was also disgusted with the system, and I don't blame him because the system did prove itself to be pretty disgusting.
You see, this is just heartbreaking for an old geezer like me. I did, in my professional exams, obviously I had to cover the principles of English law, although it wasn't a legal exam, it was something else. I won't bore everybody with the details, but we all had to plough through that in the 60s in order to become whatever we were going to become, an ACIA, an ACFC, or whatever it was going to be. So you had to have a basic understanding of the principles of English law, which of course isn't covered in schools now. I mean, it's so easy to take away people's basic freedoms and rights if they don't know they've got them to start with.
Yes, I do. I totally agree with you. But of course that is part of the so-called long march through the institutions, isn't it? That they have stripped out teachers and lecturers and so on have deliberately stripped out from teaching ideas of liberty and traditional English rights. I was going to say about the European Convention, actually, that the European Convention does depend on the sort of continental Roman law of thinking about law. In other words, the state grants us our rights. And obviously what the state gives, the state can take away. Whereas the reason why English law was so good is that it rests on the idea that there is a natural set of rights for us that the state can limit where necessary with particular laws, but basically you can do everything that hasn't been specifically prohibited, rather than the state actually giving you the right in the first place. And I think that is part of the reason why many people have a sort of natural feeling against the European Court of Human Rights.
It was a very big part of when I was speaking to sixth form colleges and universities. That was the main plank of what I was saying, as a leaver, as a Brexiteer, to say that this was, and with reasonably straightforward analogies, like you can do anything you like in your bedroom, for example, if it's your house, and if you're a parent, your children can do anything they like in their bedroom, as long as they don't play the music too loud, they don't smoke dope. There's one or two lines that you don't cross, but broadly speaking, if you've got a teenager, that's their space, and it's nothing to do with you, really. That's the English way. So I should be able to do, and I'd take it much further. I don't smoke dope. But if I wanted to smoke dope, I bloody well should be allowed to if I want to. It's got nobody's business but my own, in the privacy of my own home. But I would take it even further as a libertarian. But these things are extremely important. But if you speak to the modern youngster these days, they don't understand what they had, where it came from. The Bill of Rights, they won't know anything. They can't discuss. No, well, of course, how could you discuss, even if you go back to Magna Carta, Robin? when David Cameron was on American TV and couldn't discuss it, didn't know anything about it, didn't even know the date.
Yeah.
How do you get a first at Oxford? Is it just turning up? Perhaps, I don't know. Fill your name in at the top. He spelled Cameron right at the top.
He may have done. But my favourite quotation of Cameron, which I think sort of sums him up in many respects, and certainly sums up his idea of the Conservative Party and of conservatism, was when he was defending or talking up his policy, or his government's policy of gay marriage. He said he was a supporter of gay marriage, not despite being a conservative, but because he was.
I know, I heard it. Where do we find these people? I mean, really? I mean, the guy is a complete and total retard. But of course, he's very plausible, very urbane, old Etonian. He's got all that kind of thing. But actually, if you met him down the bloody pub, in working man's dungarees, all his fellow artisans would mark him down as a twit.
You're right. But
anyway,
but certainly he is clearly symptomatic of why the Conservative Party are now in trouble, because they have deliberately abandoned pretty much everything that they once stood for, and what's more, they are really deeply hostile to traditional values in any sense at all. And it is worth bearing in mind. People have been commenting about how we've got all these laws, and you were mentioning Alison Pearson and the way that she got victimised by Essex police over we're not quite sure whether they were saying it was a non-crime hate incident or a crime hate incident, but it's worth bearing in mind that actually most of that law and guidance and regulations came in under the Conservatives.
Absolutely, which is why they got drubbed, because they weren't Conservative at all. So they got drubbed.
It deserved to be drubbed. And it was interesting, wasn't it? The election results showed that basically 2/3 of people that have voted Conservative had given up on them.
Exactly.
Some of those went to Reform, but quite a lot stayed at home. And Labour didn't win the election because they got many more votes than they
got pretty much the same vote as last time.
Yes, they did. And in fact, they got less votes than one of the Corbyn elections. And they got about 9.5 million votes. So what we know is there's about 9.5 million people in the country who support far left causes. And at the moment, they've got control of the country. Obviously, that's quite alarming from the point of view of the fact that they've got control of the country for 5 years, and they've got a huge majority in Parliament. But it's also a demonstration that we shouldn't really despair, because what we need to find is more than 9.5 million that are prepared to turn out and vote against that, but for one particular party. So obviously at the moment, what we're faced with is that party seeming to be Reform, but then Nigel Farage has a bit of a habit of throwing away advantages like that, doesn't he?
Yes, yes, he's a great one for shooting himself in the foot, isn't he? But of course, I've argued, and one or two people up here in my part of the world, the East Riding, have taken the view that there's two things. First of all, it had to get worse before it gets better.
Yep.
So and this is now immediately getting worse.
Yes.
And of course, a very big majority can be a very dangerous game for the government.
Yes.
Funnily enough, paradoxically, counterintuitively, and especially with the problem in the Middle East, so on and so forth, where they are going to be in very big trouble if they continue, for example, to sponsor military action in the Middle East, which harms or is deemed to harm their own representatives. But that's a story for another day. Look, Robin, that's very helpful, and thank you. I've taken 45 minutes of your time, I see, and do have a look at the links, everybody, all my subscribers. Have a look. I think you'll find the English Democrat Party. I've spoken at one or two of their dues, and they are all good men and true. And if you follow me, if you're a subscriber of mine, they're good people, and if they're standing, they're certainly standing where I'm in my constituents anyway. I certainly vote for them, and I haven't said that about anybody else who's been on my show. But I would certainly vote for them because they're just bloody good, straightforward people. Simple as that, and that's enough these days for me. So, and of course, the link here to the Workers of England. Believe me, you're wasting your time paying subscriptions to some of the muppets who are now, beer and sandwiches and number 10, all that game that's going on there. You want rid of them, so consider that. And I think listen to that what Robin's been saying, and think about it. Should you ever be caught up in this web of judicial deceit, I know I'm certainly going to take notice, and the first thing I'm going to do is kick anybody who comes round in the arse, and then pick the phone up to Robin to get me off the rap. So anyway, thank you again, Robin. Thanks for coming on, and very good luck with all your endeavours, which are many. Thank you.
Thank you, Godfrey. Thank you for having me on.
As most of you know, my work is very heavily independently research-based, and I get my information from all over the world. It would help if you press the subscribe button and the little bell next to it, because the more subscribers I have, the more likely it is that international independent research institutes will share their material with me. It's most helpful, and then of course I automatically share it with you. So surprise, won't cost you anything. Thank you very much.